I don't know how long it's been since I slept through the night. 6 months, a year. It's not the nightmare that wakes me. It's the sheer, cold certainty that I am being watched. It started small, a misplaced item, a shadow at the periphery of the living room window. But now, I know the difference between paranoia and the horrible, quiet presence of another person who knows my every habit, my every move, and who, somehow, seems to be breathing the same air. I moved to this quiet subdivision in upstate New York for the peace. A modest, 2-story house on a dead-end street, surrounded by old maple and oak trees. I'm a graphic designer. I work from home, and the solitude was supposed to be a gift. For the first few months, it was. The only sounds were the wind in the eaves and the distant hum of traffic on Route 9. I'm meticulous, maybe a little obsessive. Keys go on the hook, mail goes into the shredder immediately, windows are always locked. So when I found the spare Keitha one, I kept hidden beneath a decorative garden gnome by the front porch, lying innocently on the welcome mat. I rationalized it. Maybe the neighborhood cat knocked it over. Maybe the gnome just settled. I picked it up, replaced it, and forgot about it until 2 weeks later. That's when the small, nondescript white van started appearing. Not parked outside my house, but a block away, near the entrance to the cul-de-sac. It was always there around 3 p.m., just when I finished my major client work and took a coffee break on the porch. The van was never occupied, or at least, I never saw anyone get in or out. It was just a blank, white canvas of anonymity. Then came the mail. Nothing overtly threatening, just small things that chipped away at my sanity. A single postcard of the Golden Gate Bridge, a place I'd only mentioned once in an obscure social media post years ago. Then, a package of my favorite tea brand, Darjeeling. A specific blend I could only find at one specialty shop in the next town over. No note, no sender address, just the tea. It felt like a perverse gift from a secret admirer, but the admirer was studying me with terrifying precision. I called the non-emergency police line. They took my information, offered a boilerplate suggestion about installing cameras, and closed the case within 10 minutes. I was on my own. I bought the cameras the next day, 4 of them, covering every angle of the house. The setup was tedious, drilling into the siding, running the wires through the attic, but I felt a small surge of control. I watched the feeds constantly, the front yard, the back deck, the driveway. The white van was still there, a silent sentinel. The real terror began one Tuesday night. I was in the kitchen, making dinner, and glanced at the monitor. The feed for the back deck flickered a millisecond of static, followed by a momentary darkening of the image. I dismissed it as a power surge, but when I looked closer, I saw it. The outdoor light on the deck, which was off, was casting a faint, almost imperceptible shadow. It was tall, thin, and static, pressed flat against the wall, just out of the camera's direct view. My breath hitched. I dropped the knife. I waited, heart hammering against my ribs, watching that shadow not move, not breathe, just be. It was the outline of a person, standing perfectly still, positioned exactly in the camera's blind spot, a spot they had to know existed. I crept to the kitchen window, peering through a slit in the blinds, but the deck was empty, bathed in the normal gloom of the night. The shadow on the screen was gone. I checked the recording, the flicker, the shadow, then nothing. I didn't want to go out there, but I had to know. Clutching a heavy wrench, I unlocked the back door, swung it open, and flicked on the deck light. Everything was normal. The grill, the 2 empty chairs, the potted plants, until I saw the small, white chalk mark on the deck railing. It was a simple arrow, pointing directly to the corner where the camera had been unable to see. A casual, confident signature. The incident that broke me happened 2 days later. I was in the middle of a video conference, presenting mock-ups to a client on the West Coast. My focus was absolute. I was clicking through slides, my voice clear and professional. Mid-sentence, I noticed something strange in my peripheral vision, in the reflection of my darkened computer screen. There was a slight shift in the air behind me, near the hallway. I paused my presentation, my blood turning to ice water. I slowly turned my head, careful not to alert the client to the terror crawling up my spine. The hallway was empty, but then my eyes caught the small, black fabric rectangle lying on the floor, just outside my office door. It was the cloth cleaning patch for my glasses, the one I kept in a small, closed drawer on my desk, a drawer I had locked 5 minutes before the conference started. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They hadn't just been watching from the street. They had been in the house, not just watching the shadow, but actively demonstrating their presence while I was on a live video call. They could have been standing 10 feet behind me, knowing I couldn't scream without causing a scene. The subtle, silent breach of my personal space, the key, the gift, the shadow, the cloth, it was all building to this one horrifying realization of proximity. I grabbed the phone, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it, and dialed 911. As I stumbled over the words, trying to explain the unexplainable to the dispatcher, I heard it, a faint, almost musical sound, like a single key from a piano. It came from the floor above me, from the attic access panel. C-sharp, a note I hadn't heard since I was 10 years old, practicing on the family piano. I left that house that night, locking the door on my way out, but not before I stood in the driveway and stared at the dark, second-story window. And that's when I saw it. The curtains in my spare bedroom, which I always kept closed, were pulled back about an inch, just enough for someone to be looking out. The white van was gone, but the presence wasn't. I'm renting a small apartment now, 3 states away, but every time I look out the window, every time I hear a strange sound in the ventilation, I know the distance doesn't matter. They didn't want the house or my possessions. They wanted the knowledge of me, and they took it. I still get the postcards sometimes, always an American landmark, always from a different city, always arriving just as I start to feel safe. The moment I saw the blue sticky note on my dashboard, I knew. It wasn't the violation of the car that struck me first, it was the color. I only ever used blue sticky notes. The paper was the same brand I bought in bulk from the office supply store near my job in downtown Seattle. Written on it, in careful block letters, was a single word: watch. No exclamation point, no signature, just the bare, unsettling command. I hadn't even parked in a garage. This was out in the open, in the crowded employee lot of the software company where I worked. How long had they been watching to know my preferred stationery? I'm a data analyst. My life revolves around predictable patterns, spreadsheets, and the absolute logic of numbers. I live alone in an apartment complex just outside Redmond, a place where people keep to themselves and the biggest worry is finding a good parking spot. After the first note, I started checking my car religiously, before and after work. Nothing. Days blurred into weeks of high-alert normalcy. The logical part of my brain screamed, coincidence, a prank, a coworker. But the primal part was whispering something colder. The notes returned. This time, they were left inside my apartment. I found the second one tucked into my laptop keyboard, placed precisely under the F1 key. It read, "Listen." The third was inside a carton of milk I had just bought, sealed and floating near the top. "Stop." This escalation was the genius of it. No forced entry, no alarms tripped. Just the quiet, absolute certainty that a boundary I thought impenetrable had been crossed, repeatedly. I lived on the 3rd floor. My windows overlooked a courtyard, too high for casual observation. I changed the locks, installed a simple chain bolt, and started documenting everything. I noted the date, time, location, and the precise wording of each note, treating it like a statistical anomaly I needed to understand. I began leaving small tells myself. Piece of tape on the window seam, a hair across the doorknob, but every time, they remained undisturbed. Yet, the notes kept coming, each one more personal and psychologically tailored than the last. They stopped being single words and became short, unnerving phrases. The creepiest notes often appeared when I was asleep. I would wake up, walk into the kitchen to make coffee, and see one affixed to the magnetic knife block where it hadn't been the night before. One morning, the note read, "You hum when you load the dishwasher. It's a gift." It was true. I did that. An insignificant, private quirk I wasn't even conscious of. Another time, I was working late on a project, stressed, and talking to myself under my breath, a habit I hated. The next morning, a note was slipped under my bedroom door. "The deadline is Monday. You'll make it. Don't worry." These weren't threats. They were endorsements. Affirmations that felt infinitely more terrifying than a simple "I will hurt you." It was an absolute assertion of intimacy I had never granted. It felt less like being stalked and more like being groomed by a predator. I became a prisoner of my own habits. I stopped humming. I stopped talking to myself. I wore noise-canceling headphones even when I wasn't listening to music. I tried to introduce random elements into my routine, taking different routes to work, changing grocery stores. But the notes proved my efforts futile. One Saturday, I spontaneously drove 3 hours east into the Cascades, rented a remote cabin for the night, and ate takeout alone. When I got back into my apartment on Sunday, there was a sticky note on the bathroom mirror. It was white this time, a new variable. It simply said, "Did the mountains clear your head?" Underneath, drawn with almost casual speed, was a simple, stylized sketch of the exact cabin I had rented. No address, no town, just the visual proof that the distance I had sought was meaningless. The climax of this insidious campaign happened at work. I was alone in my cube, running a massive data aggregation query, the office nearly empty. My mouse suddenly felt odd. I lifted my hand and stared at the dark, matte finish of the ergonomic device. Stuck to the underside, almost completely hidden from view, was the final note. It was smaller than the others, folded over twice. I unfolded it slowly, the silence of the large, empty office pressing down on me. The handwriting was neat, almost elegant. It read, "The blue sticky notes are in the third drawer, down, top right." My stomach dropped out. The blue sticky notes, the specific brand, the entire pad, were in a small, seldom used filing cabinet under my desk. They were locked away, and the key was on a chain I never let go of. This meant they didn't just know I had them. They had been here, in my cube, during working hours, with the confidence to rummage through my locked files. I looked up, spinning my chair around, scanning the silent rows of cubicles, the deserted halls. I felt the cold realization that my entire world, the sanctity of my home, the security of my workplace, the solitude of my thoughts, had been completely breached, not by force, but by a quiet, calculating intelligence. I quit my job the next day. I packed my life into 2 suitcases and left the apartment key taped to the management office door, abandoning the security deposit and everything that couldn't fit. I moved 3,000 miles away to a different state, changed my name, and cut off all social media. I'm living under the radar now, working freelance, but I still check the underside of every surface I touch. I don't use sticky notes anymore, and sometimes, when I'm walking home, I catch myself humming a G-flat, and the cold, awful certainty floods back. They aren't gone. They're just waiting for the next opportunity to leave a message. I still keep my phone off speaker when I'm alone, even years later. It's a habit born from the absolute certainty that the person on the other end is listening, not just to my words, but to the inflection, the silences, the atmosphere of the room. It was never about what they said, it was about what they already knew. I was living in a small, historic town near Annapolis, Maryland, teaching high school English. My life was public in the quiet, small-town way. I had a regular table at the local coffee shop. I went to the same gym every Tuesday and Thursday, and I walked my golden retriever, Barnaby, around the community lake at 6 a.m. sharp. I was a routine. The first hint was the phone calls. They had no sound on the other end, just a dead air that stretched on for minutes. I initially wrote it off as a bad connection or telemarketers. The calls came once a day, then twice, then 4 or 5 times, always from a blocked number. The tone of the silence changed though. It progressed from dead air to something that sounded like controlled, shallow breathing. When I would finally hang up, the phone would ring back instantly. It felt like I was failing a test, that by hanging up, I was giving the observer exactly the reaction they wanted, frustrated and slightly rattled. One night a call came through, and instead of silence, I heard a single, distinct sound, the click of a cigarette lighter igniting. I don't smoke, but my neighbor, Mr. Harrison, used to light up on his porch every night, around 9. The stalking accelerated with a calculated surgical intrusion into my routines. Barnaby, my dog, became the focus. One Tuesday, I let him out into the fenced backyard before heading to the gym. When I returned an hour later, I noticed the dog had chewed through one of his rubber squeaky toys, the tough blue one he loved. It was shredded, but on the center of my worn, faded deck, right next to the wreckage of the toy, was a perfectly new, identical blue, squeaky toy. It hadn't been there when I left. The thought of someone climbing my fence, replacing the dog's toy in the brief hour I was gone, and leaving no trace, turned my blood cold. It was a statement of access, a demonstration of competence. I stopped taking Barnaby to the lake. I changed my gym hours. I started driving a long, convoluted route to work. The calls stopped, but the surveillance only intensified. I started finding things inside my house that didn't belong. A small, shiny button, the kind you'd find on a wool coat resting on the rim of my coffee mug. A single, perfectly preserved autumn leaf, brown and crisp, placed precisely on the center of my bedside table. These weren't overt they were phantom intrusions. The button was too small to feel like a threat, the leaf too innocent, but the context was shattering. It meant they were moving through my life, knowing my schedule so perfectly that they could slip in and out of the house unseen, perhaps while I was out walking Barnaby for 5 minutes, or maybe even while I was asleep in the next room. I reached a point where I didn't trust my own eyes. I started leaving things out of place deliberately, a coaster askew, a magazine upside down, and the stalker would correct them. I would come home to find the coaster centered, the magazine neatly righted. It was an unnerving, silent correction, a passive-aggressive suggestion that my life was messy and they were here to restore order. The fear didn't scream, it whispered, eroding my sense of reality. My classroom became the only safe haven, a public space filled with other people, but even that was violated. One afternoon, I returned from the staff lounge to find the quote I had written on the whiteboard, a line from The Great Gatsby, had been corrected. My quote was, "So we beat on boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past." The word past had been neatly underlined, and in precise script next to it, the word present was written, a personalized, chilling piece of literary criticism. The confrontation came on a Sunday afternoon. I was in the basement, doing laundry, a place I rarely went. It was dusty, dim, and separated from the main house. As I pulled a load from the dryer, I looked up at the small, narrow basement window, which was at ground level. The window was covered by thick, dried dirt and spiderwebs, making it impossible to see through. But as I watched, a small, circular spot was suddenly wiped clean on the center of the pane, revealing a small, dark patch of the world outside. And then, an eye appeared in that spot. It was a dark eye, framed by a thick, heavy brow, completely unblinking. It was the eye of someone watching, waiting, patiently. I didn't scream or run. I stood there, frozen, my fingers gripping the damp towels. The eye didn't move. It was utterly still, observing me in the dusty gloom. It wasn't a flash of movement or a fleeting shadow. It was a definitive, protracted moment of mutual observation. This was the peak of the fear. The moment where the watchers stopped hiding and simply presented themselves as an absolute fixture of my reality. I felt my lungs seize up. It was only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, the eye blinked, once, heavily, and disappeared as the spot was slowly wiped over again, restoring the layer of dirt and obscuring the window completely. I'd never heard the footsteps or the sound of someone running away. I went upstairs, called the police, and filed a detailed report. But without any physical evidence or threat, their hands were tied. I sold the house 3 weeks later, moving cross-country to San Diego. I'm a completely different person now. I've changed my appearance. I work entirely remotely, and I live in an upper-floor apartment with no ground-level windows. But I know the stalking wasn't about the location or the house. It was about me. Every time I get a notification that my spam folder has caught a new email, or when my dog stares intently at a fixed point on the ceiling, I feel the same chill. I understand that the feeling of being watched is not just an emotion. It is a permanent state of being, a psychological imprint that the stalker left behind, a terrifying, unseen roommate I will carry for the rest of my life.